place. So I suppose you want to hear the second story of Sinbad. Oh. Right, so it's the second journey of Sinbad the Sailor. You must know, my brothers, that as I told you yesterday, I was enjoying a life of the greatest pleasure and happiness until one day I got the idea of travelling to foreign parts, as I wanted to trade, to look at other countries and islands, and to earn my living. After I had thought this over, I took out a large sum of money and bought trade goods and other things that would be useful on the voyage. I packed these up, and when I went down to the coast, I found a fine new ship with a good set of sails, fully manned and well equipped. A number of other merchants were there, and they and I loaded our goods on board. We put to sea that day and had a pleasant voyage, moving from one sea and one island to another, and whenever we anchored, we were met by local traders and dignitaries, as well as buyers and sellers, with whom we bought, sold and bartered our goods. Things went on like this until fate brought us to a pleasant island, full of trees with ripe fruits, scented flowers, singing birds and limpid streams, but without any houses or inhabitants. The captain anchored there, and the merchants together with the crew disembarked to enjoy its trees and its birds, giving praise to the one omnipotent God and wondering at his great power. I had gone with this landing party, and I sat down by a spring of clear water among the trees. I had some food with me, and I sat there eating what God had provided for me. There was a pleasant breeze. I had no worries, and as I felt drowsy, I stretched out at my ease, enjoying the breeze and delightful scents, until I fell fast asleep. When I woke up, there was no one to be found there, human or nor jinn. The ship had sailed off, leaving me, as not a single one on board, merchants or crew, had remembered me. I turned right and I turned left, and when I failed to find anyone at all, I fell into so deep a depression that my gallbladder almost exploded through the force of my cares, sorrow and distress. I had no possessions, no food and no drink. I was alone, and in my distress I despaired of life. I said to myself, the picture does not always remain unbroken. I escaped the first time by meeting someone who took me with him from the island to an inhabited part. But this time, how very, very unlikely it is that I should meet anyone to bring me to civilization. I started to weep and wail, blaming myself in my grief for what I had done, the voyage on which I had embarked, and for the hardships I had inflicted on myself after I had been sitting at home in my own land at my ease, enjoying myself and taking pleasure in eating well, drinking good wine and wearing fine clothes, in no need of more money or goods. I regretted having left Baghdad to go to sea after what I had to endure on my first voyage, which had brought me close to death. I recited the formula. We belong to God, and to him and we do return. And I was so close to losing my reason. Then I got up and began to wander around, not being able to sit still in any one place. I climbed a high tree, and from the top of it I started to look right and left, but all I could see was sky, water, trees, birds, island and sand. Then I stared more closely. I caught sight of something white and huge on the island. I climbed down from my tree and set out to walk towards it. On I went until when I reached it, I found it to be a white dome, very tall with a large circumference. I went nearer and walked around it, but I could find no door to the dome itself was completely smoothly polished, and I had neither the strength nor agility to climb it. I marked my starting point and made a circuit of it to measure its circumference, which came to 50 full paces, and then I started to think of some way to get inside it. It was coming on towards evening. I could no longer see the sun, and the sky had grown dark. I thought the sun must have been hidden by a cloud, but since it was summer, I found this surprising, and I raised my head to look again. There, flying in the sky, I caught sight of an enormous bird with a huge body and broad wings. It was this that had covered the face of the sun, screening its rays from the island. I was even more amazed, but I remembered an old traveller's tale of a giant bird called a ruck, that lived on an island and fed its chicks on elephants, and I became sure that my dome was simply a ruk's egg. While I was wondering at what Almighty God had created, the parent bird flew down and settled on the egg, covering it with its wings and stretching its legs behind it on the ground. It fell asleep. Glory be to God. Who does not sleep? And I got up. I undid my turban, which I folded and twisted until it was like a rope. I tied this tightly around my waist, and I attached myself as firmly as I could to the bird's leg, in the hope that it might take me to a civilized region, which would be better for me than staying on the island. I spent the night awake, fearful that if I slept, the bird might fly off before I realized what was happening. When daylight came, it rose from the egg, and with a loud cry it carried me up into the sky, soaring higher and higher, until I thought it must have reached the Imperium. It then began its descent, and brought me back to Earth, settling on a high peak. As soon as it had landed, I quickly cut myself free from its legs, as I was afraid of it, although it hadn't noticed that I was there. I was trembling, and as I undid my turban, freeing it from the bird's legs, and I then walked off, while for its part the bird took something in its talons from the surface of the ground and flew back up into the sky. When I looked to see what it had taken, I discovered that it was a huge snake with an enormous body. I watched in wonder as it left with its prey, and then I walked on further to find myself on a high ridge under which there was a broad and deep valley, flanked by vast and unscalable mountains that towered so high into the sky that its summit was invisible. I blamed myself for what I had done, and wished I had stayed on the island, saying to myself, that was better than this barren place, as there were various kinds of fruits to eat and streams from which to drink, whereas here there were no trees, no fruits, and no streams. I recited the formula again. There is no power and no might except with God, the exalted, the Almighty, adding, every time I escape from one disaster, I fall into another that is even worse. I got up, and plucking up my courage, I walked down into the valley, where I discovered that its soil was composed completely of diamonds, the hard and compact stone that is used for boring holes in metals, gems, porcelain, and onyx. Neither iron nor rock has any effect on it. No part of it can be cut off, and the only way in which it can be broken is by the use of lead. The valley was full of snakes and serpents, as big as palm trees, so huge that they could have swallowed any elephant that they met. But these only came out at night, and they hid away by day for fear of the rooks and eagles, lest they be carried away and torn to bits. Although I don't know why that should be, I stayed there and filled with regret at what I had done, saying to myself, by God, you have hastened your own death, as evening drew on. I walked around for a place where I could spend the night, and I was so afraid of the snakes that my concern for my safety, I forgot about eating or drinking. Nearby I spotted a cave, and when I approached it, I found that its entrance was narrow. I went in, and then I pushed a large stone that I found nearby in order to block it behind me. I'm safe in here, I told myself, and then when day breaks I shall go out and see what fate brings me. At that point I looked inside my cave, only to see a huge snake asleep over its eggs at the far end. All the hairs rose on my body, and raising my head I entrusted myself to fate. I spent a wakeful night, and when dawn broke I removed that stone that I had used to block the entrance, and came out staggering like a drunken man, through the effects of sleeplessness, hunger, and fear. Then, as I was walking, suddenly, to my astonishment, a large carcass fell in front of me, although there was no one in sight. I thought of a traveller's tale that I had heard long ago of the dangers in the Diamond Mountains, and how the only way the diamond traders can reach it is to take and kill a sheep which they skin and cut up. They then throw it down from the mountain into the valley, and as it is fresh when it falls, some of the stones there stick to it. The traders leave it until midday, at which point eagles and vultures swoop down on it, carry it up onto the mountain with their talons, and then the traders come and scare them away from their flesh by shouting at them, after which they go up and remove the stones that are sticking to it. The flesh is left for the birds and the beasts, and the stones are taken back home by the traders. This is the only way in which they can get hold of the diamonds. I looked at the carcass and remembered the story, so I went up to it and cleared away a large number of diamonds, which I put in my purse and among my clothes. While I stored others in my pockets, my belt, my turban, and elsewhere among my belongings, while I was doing this, another large carcass fell down, and lying on my back, I set it on my breast and tied myself to it with my turban, holding on to it and lifting it up from the ground. At that point, an eagle came down and carried it off into the air with its talons, with me fastened to it. The eagle flew up to the mountain top where it deposited the carcass and was about to tear at it when there came a loud shout from behind it, together with the noise of sticks striking against the rocks. The eagle took fright and flew off, and having freed myself from the carcass, I stood there beside it, with my clothes all smeared with blood. At that point, the trader who had shouted at the eagle came up, and when he saw me standing there, he trembled and was too afraid of me to speak. He went to the carcass and turned it over, giving a great cry of disappointment and reciting the formula. There is no might and no power except with God. We take refuge with God from Satan the accursed. In his regret, he struck the palms of his hands together, exclaiming, Alas, alas, what is this? I went up to him, and when he asked me who I was and why I had come there, I told him, Don't be afraid. I am a mortal man of good stock, a former merchant. My story is remarkable indeed, and there is a strange tale attached to my arrival at this mountain and this valley. There is no need for you to be frightened, for I have enough to make you happy. A large number of diamonds, which I shall give what will satisfy you. And each of my stones is better than anything else you can get, so don't be unhappy or alarmed. The man thanked me, calling down blessings on me, and as we talked, the other traders, each of whom had thrown down a carcass, heard the sound of our voices and came up to us. They congratulated me on my escape, and, when they had taken me away with them, I told them my whole story, explaining the perils that I endured on my voyage, as well as the reason why I had got to the valley. After that, I presented many of the diamonds that I had with me to the man who had thrown down the carcass that I had used. In his delight, he renewed his blessings. The others exclaimed, By God, fate has granted you a second life, for you are the first man ever to come here and escape from the valley. God be praised that you are safe. I passed the night with them in a spot that was both pleasant and safe, delighted that I had escaped unhurt from the valley of the snakes and had got back to inhabited parts. At dawn, we got up, and as we moved across the great mountain, we could see huge numbers of snakes in the valley, but we kept on our way until we reached an orchard on a large and beautiful island, where there were camphor trees, each one of which could provide shade for 100 people. Whoever wants to get some camphor must use a long tool to bore a hole at the top of the tree and then collect what comes out. The liquid camphor flows down and then solidifies like gum, as this is the sap of the tree, and when it dries up, it can be used for firewood. On the island is a type of wild beast known as a rhinoceros, which grazes there just as cows and buffaloes do in our own parts. It is a huge beast with a body larger than that of a camel, a herbivore with one single horn, some 10 cubits in the centre of its head, containing what looks like the image of a man. There is also a species of cattle there. According to seafarers and travellers who visited the mountain and its districts, this rhinoceros can carry a large elephant on its horn and go on pasturing on the island and on the shore without paying any attention to it. The elephant impaled on its horn will then die, and in the heat of the sun, grease from its corpse will trickle onto the head of the rhinoceros. When this gets into its eyes, it will go blind and then lies down by the coast. A rook will swoop on it and carry it off in its talons in order to feed its chicks, both with the beast itself and with what's on its horn. On the island I saw many buffaloes, a type unlike any that I've ever seen, and different to what we have at home. I exchanged a number of the stones that I brought with me in my pocket from the Diamond Valley with the traders in return for a cash payment, and some of the goods they had brought with them, which they carried for me. I travelled on in their company, inspecting different lands and God's creations, from one valley and one city to another, buying and selling as we went, until we arrived at Basra. We stayed there for a few days, and then I returned to Baghdad. When Sinbad reached Baghdad, the city of peace, he went to his own district and entered his house. He had with him a large number of diamonds, as well as cash, and a splendid display of all kinds of goods. After he had met his family and relatives, he dispensed alms and gave gifts to every one of his relations and companions. He began to enjoy good food and wine, to dress in fine clothes, and to frequent the company of his friends. He forgot about his past sufferings and continued to enjoy a pleasant, relaxed and contented life, with entertainments of all sorts. All those who had heard of his return would come and ask him about his voyage and about the lands that he had visited. He would tell them of his experiences and amaze them by recounting the difficulties with which he had to contend. After that, they would congratulate him on his safe return. This is the end of the story of all that happened to him on his second voyage, and when he had finished his account, he said, "Tomorrow, inshallah, I shall tell you about my third voyage." When we had told all of this to Sinbad the landsman, those present were filled with astonishment. They all dined with him that evening, and he gave orders that the second Sinbad be given 100 mithqals of gold. Sinbad the landsman took these and went on his way, marvelling at what his host had endured, and filled with gratitude. When he reached his own house, he called down blessings upon him. The next morning, when it was light, he got up, and having performed the morning prayer, he went back to the house of Sinbad the sailor, as he had been told to. On his arrival, he said good morning to his host, who welcomed him, and the two sat together until the rest of the company arrived. When they had eaten and drunk and were pleasantly and cheerfully relaxed, Sinbad the sailor began to tell the story of his third voyage, which I shall make you wait until tomorrow.